Hello, everybody. Jan Rutherford here with Self-Reliant Leadership, and we have a really special office hours, or what we used to call LinkedIn Live today. I've got my very good friend Scott Mann as a guest, and he is the author of Operation Pineapple Express, which is what we're going to talk about today. But before I bring him on, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Scott. Retired Green Beret, 23 years in the Army, founder of Rooftop Leadership. So that means he's a warrior storyteller, a leadership expert, a keynote speaker. He's done 3 TEDx talks. And like me, he is helping a lot of veterans in transition. He's on the board of Spirit of America. He's got his own nonprofit called The Hero's Journey, also has the Stability Institute. And he's got books out there, a bunch of books out there, Leading Through Chaos, Thrive Like a Green Beret, Game Changers, Going Local to Defeat Violent Extremists, Mission America, Straight Talk About Military Transition, which he's given away a ton of books to some of the veterans that go on my crucibles. And also importantly, he is a playwright and an actor, and he did the play Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. And so I want to bring Scott on. And Scott, welcome.
Hey, Jan. Thank you, man.
Hey, what did I leave out in that bio?
I got tired just listening to that. My Monty is always like, she's like, can you just stop? Like, just bring it down a little. And I can't. I just got to. I'm like one of my team sergeants said one time. I'm like a great white. If I stop moving, I die.
Yeah. Movement's everything to me. And Monty, by the way, for those that don't know, is Scott's lovely wife. And Scott has got a little bit of movement going on because you want to just tell us where you're at?
Yeah. I wish I was more static than what I am, but I'm actually at the Global Friends of Afghanistan conference at Georgetown. Just an amazing conference, Jan, of all, not all, but a lot of the volunteers who did such great work to help our Afghan allies escape the Taliban when the country fell. And there's a lot of amazing Afghan leaders here as well. General Alizai, one of the final commanders of the Afghan National Army, just spoke. So just breaking away from that and spending some time with you and your crew.
Yeah. And speaking of the crew, for those of you listening in, if you can let us know where you're calling in from, that would be great. And if you have any questions for Scott at any point, put them up there and we'll get those in. So again, the book is Operation Pineapple Express. The anniversary of our withdrawal from Afghanistan was August 15th. And one of the things that you said on that date was, I've struggled with what to say today. I'm embarrassed at how we handled the whole thing. I pray for the Afghan people living under the Taliban and those trying to make new lives abroad and in the U.S. I know this is a rough day for you. We love you and we'll never stop trying. Check in on our fellow Afghans, resettling veterans and active duty veterans and other evac volunteers 2 weeks ago. You said.
Yeah.
So, I mean, any additional thoughts? I mean, again, you're at a conference right now where it's all about this.
Yeah, I mean, I still feel that way. I still feel a level of embarrassment, and I'm saying that primarily as a Green Beret for me, because like you, we were trained to work by, with, and through our indigenous partners, and that there's just an understood promise that you have each other's back, and I don't feel like that happened, and so I feel a deep level of responsibility for particularly our Afghan special operations partners, for the women who stepped up to lead that country. And I still feel that way. A lot of the veterans that I've talked to, Jan, have said that, in fact, in many ways, this anniversary has been harder than the collapse itself, because so little has happened since then to help the Afghan people.
And for those that don't know, the unique thing about Green Berets versus other special operations is they're a warrior and they're a diplomat.
Right.
And in the book, and part of the job is to build teams in foreign lands. And you said when you build teams in foreign lands, which blend American and foreign partner forces to stand against oppression, there is an understood and eternal promise. I have your back.
That's right. That's right. And I think honestly, what if that were the way that we navigated the world and everything that we did? I really truly believe that. I think that's part of the challenge our country's having right now, is that we're so divided that even at a team level in corporate America and in politics, I'm not sure we have each other's back. But in special forces, I can tell you, and with the partner work that we do with other countries, it's imperative. And if you don't, then everybody's at risk. And that, I'm afraid that's what we're facing right now.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of go back to the beginning, and for those that don't know, talk a little bit about what Pineapple Express is. And again, the lead in is operating out of basements and garages.
Yeah, it was. I have to say that there were so many groups. Many of them are here today. That when Afghanistan collapsed, mostly veterans who stepped into the breach and tried to help their Afghan partners any way they could. Pineapple Express was no different. It was a group of former Green Berets and active duty Green Berets, Navy SEALs, and other veterans who basically, one guy was in trouble. His name was Nizam Nizami. He was an Afghan commando, Afghan special forces, and Jan actually graduated our qualification course at Fort Bragg. He was shot through the face, defending fellow U.S. service members, warning them of an ambush, and was back in the fight 2.5 weeks later. It's just the kind of guy he is, just an amazing human being. And he contacted me starting in early summer that things were falling apart, that the Taliban were sending him text threats, that they knew exactly where he was. They were peering in his uncle's window where he was hiding in Kabul. And when Kabul collapsed on the 15th, it just became very clear that his special immigration visa was not going to make it. It had been in process for a year, and that if he was going to make it out of there without being executed, it was going to be a private effort of his friends to do that. And that's what Pineapple Express started out as.
Yeah. And so, was that somebody you knew before he was sent to Fort Bragg and went through the Q course, that you facilitated that, or was he already what we would have called a G chief way back then?
I already knew Nizam. When we were doing the village stability program, you talked about my book, Game Changers. That was a kind of a modern day Magnificent Seven approach, where Green Berets went into villages and donned indigenous clothing, spoke the language, and worked very closely with Afghan villagers. That's when I met Nizam. He was an Afghan special forces sergeant, and their teams were mirrored after U.S. special forces. And so they would do combined operations in these villages to work with local Afghans to stand up on their own against the Taliban. And that's how I met Nizam in 2010. I retired in 2013, and we stayed in touch over the years. We sent cards to each other at Eid, at Christmas time. He would check on my family. And he loved his country. He had no intentions of leaving his country until things started to fall apart. And it was obvious that he was being targeted by the Taliban. That was generally, Jan, the state of affairs, not just for Pineapple, but most veterans who got involved in this had friendships that were going back to their time in the country. Not all of them, but a lot of them. That's how this got started.
Right. And again, the context is, when you're going into these places, in the beginning, is saying, hey, we're here to help. We're going to make things better. Basically, trust us. And, the way it works is you're establishing trust over time. You're doing different activities that build trust. And basically, I'll do what I say I'm going to do. We're not going to let you down. We're going to provide the resources, clear the obstacles, again, to free the oppressed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, yeah. And again, not that this is anything like what's going on in the business world, but one of the ways it's similar is if you're in sales and you're trying to establish, a product in a market, you're basically going in and trying to establish a relationship with buyers, distributors, all kinds of people. And you're basically saying, hey, trust me, we're going to get the product to you. It's going to be to a certain quality. It's going to be on time. And if you do that, everything's great. If all of a sudden everything you promised, headquarters doesn't have your back, headquarters doesn't have the material, the supply, or it's faulty quality, it's on you. Because they didn't buy from the factory. They bought from you because of that relationship.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right. That's right.
I
Yeah, that's a great correlation. In fact, I think a lot of what's happened with the supply chain issue, you've seen a lot of client-facing professionals in that same kind of boat that a Green Beret advisor is in a village, when you have to look those elders in the eyes and say, yeah, I know I told you this, but here's actually what my bosses are going to do. And it's not that, right? It's that same kind of thing where the person at the street level who's having to look the other party in the eyes, and there's a level of trust and commitment of delivering the goods, and all of a sudden you can't. And in my organization, Jan, and you and I've talked about this a lot, we call it rooftop leadership.
Yeah.
The whole approach is taking that special forces mindset of going into low trust places and understanding that even though we are modern around us, everything's technological and modern, the reality is we're basically well-dressed Neanderthals. I mean, we are still very social creatures. We operate and navigate the world of social capital, relationships, trust, rapport. And the people who are going to own rooms, who are going to have the best relationships, who are going to be able to mobilize people to do things, they're the ones that understand how human connection works. And getting people to go up on that proverbial rooftop and make a stand when you have no authority over them, it's simply the relationship that carries the day. And I will tell you, what we did with Pineapple is exactly the same thing I teach in corporate America. It's all the same thing because we're all essentially wired the same way.
Yeah, I love the phrase, social capital. It literally is what happens between people. And I've been reflecting with a number of clients recently about, the best teams that I've ever been on, the best teams I work with today. We call this thing, that we want to do when we take over a team building. And I don't know if anybody really knows what that means, because what it really means is, everybody that works together actually likes each other. They like going to work. They like collaborating. They have relationships. And I remember thinking early in my career at this big pharma company I was at, I loved going to work. I mean, I had fun. And, you're reading about all these people that don't want to go back into the office. I'm like, well, it might not be their fault. It might be the leader's fault that they haven't created an environment where, people can develop these great relationships. So as a leader, I want to kind of go back even before Pineapple Express. When you were out there, how did you create that glue, not only between your American team, but the partner forces, where you actually became friends and that relationship was sustained to this day?
Two things that I will say to that. What was amazing about the Village Stability Program, where these 12-man teams would go into these areas and they would build, they over 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, they would start out, the team, when the village was attacked, would be the only ones fighting back. Everybody else would be down below in their homes, huddled in the darkness, waiting for the attack to go away. You'd only have 12 operators up on that rooftop fighting back. Within a couple of weeks, couple of months, you'd have one farmer, then another farmer, then another farmer up on their rooftop, until ultimately, and I saw this in 113 villages over 18 months, every single village, every rooftop in that village was fighting back the way they were designed to do. And so if you were to ask me, what led to that collective output? Because ultimately, that's the same thing we're all looking for in leadership, is how do you get to a collective mobilization of people to do something together they otherwise wouldn't do, particularly in a low trust, distracted environment. And what I would say are two things. One, those Green Berets went up to the rooftop and fought exactly the way they said they would, even when no one followed them. And I think that's very, very important to note, because leadership today often means leading when no one follows you initially and being up on that rooftop alone. The second one, and this is just as critical, was that they built that social capital, that relationship portfolio, that trust. You build that when risk is low, not high. And this is where most people in our transactional society completely miss the boat. They try to build trust or leverage trust when risk is high. And as humans who are primal creatures, we smell that a mile away. We know when somebody kind of shuffles up in a crisis and goes, hey, buddy, hey, what's going on? And you're like, nope. But if that person was out there in the field with you, sweating, drinking chai with you, celebrating your kid's birthday when nobody else was looking, if that person was there for you when risk was low, then you better believe that reciprocity will kick in and that other party will be with you when risk is high. And that's how we're wired to survive as humans. And if we understand that and we invest in social capital when risk is low, we can leverage it when risk is high.
It's funny you say that. I think about I ran 2 crucibles this summer in Ouray, Colorado. At altitude, it was, even in the summer, it's cold, it's raining, it's wet. Yeah. And it's funny, we had a group, it was about 16, 17 people total. Everybody knew who helped collect firewood and who didn't.
Yep.
Everybody knew. And, it's like, you think that's not a big deal, but it is. I mean,
it's everything.
Yeah. And then you think, well, what's collecting firewood in the business world? And I've always said that, in the business world, if you've got a hero, somebody that stays late to get the RFP done, you got to break down in the team. The team didn't pull together, because in the business world, you should never need a hero. It should always be a team.
We've got such a dissonance, Jan, between the leaders and the led. If it's another thing I've learned from Pineapple in interviewing all of the iconic Green Beret sergeants, SEAL, NCOs, and others, there's a real dissonance, and I'm just going to be honest, between our senior leaders in the military, past and present, and the men and women who have served them faithfully for 20 years. And it's palpable right now. 73% of veterans feel betrayed from what happened in Afghanistan. And I think you can draw a corollary to the corporate world. I do a lot of work in the corporate world like you do, and I see a lot of dissonance between the leaders and the led. And one of the things that I think is hard for us as junior leaders, as mid-level managers, is how do we lead up? How do we lead when there seems to be this palpable gap between senior leaders and what's really happening on the ground? And the fact of the matter is, and this was what Pineapple really represented, as did many other groups, is we saw that nobody else was coming.
Yeah.
Nobody answered the phone. So we answered the phone and we did the best we could because it was the right thing to do. And a lot of times people are just waiting for that. They just want to see someone step into the arena and do the right thing when nobody else is coming. And there's such a shortage of that these days that people are hungry for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talk a little bit more about that. Because I'd like to understand what the risk was for you guys in doing what you did, and how that might relate again to the corporate world of sticking your neck out. Because as we say on the Crucible, the great thing about a bunch of strangers getting together is they have nothing to prove, protect, or promote. In the corporate world, they have everything to prove, protect, and promote. It's their job, it's their livelihood, it's their family. So what was your risk? How does that relate to corporate?
Yeah, great question. I worked in the corporate world of the U.S. military until 2013, and I retired, even though I'd been selected as a battalion commander, because I was done with that approach and I wanted to build my own journey. But there's risk, whether you're an entrepreneur, nonprofit leader, there's always risk in doing the right thing. Because we live in a modern contract, mass technology society that operates off credit and achievement more than it does, status and contribution to the group. It's just the world we live in. So there's always going to be a risk that careerism and other trappings of modern society will tell us, as Stephen Pressfield calls it, resistance. This is a risk to you. Don't do it. And the reality is, for me personally, no one took more risk than the Afghans, in my opinion, and the U.S. service members and diplomats who were on the ground in Kabul. Let's be clear about that.
Right.
But in terms of assisting our Afghan brothers and sisters remotely, the way Pineapple did, the risk that I took was, one, my business took a major hit. It's still taking it because of how much time this has taken. My nonprofit and our play took a major hit. So all of the things I was building were put on the back burner. The FBI visited my house because of the fact that we were raising money extremely fast in a time when people were really focused on this. There was the risk of people getting killed doing what you asked them to do as a shepherd and a guide to these very, very vulnerable people. And then, of course, the active duty people who were in, and by the way, there was risk. People lost their jobs. They lost their bank accounts. They cashed in their private pensions to make this happen. But then there were active duty people, Jan, NCOs, junior officers, who were doing this basically on the down low. and they were risking their careers. But at the end of the day, no one was going to, at least in our group, was going to live. The biggest risk, as my father said, was being on the wrong side of this thing and not honoring a promise to your teammate, because that one you never get over. And my kids were watching me, man. Like, that's the kind of thing I can't live with, to me. So there were inherent risks, and some of them manifested. But at the end of the day, they were nothing compared to the risk of the moral violation of my own code. And that one I just couldn't deal with.
Well, yeah. And you said something, profound there about, you didn't use the word, but there is a duty that you felt, a duty that had nothing to do with wearing the uniform. It was about human relationships. And again, I mean, part of that was all that training you went through, all the people that you were around that are like-minded, that was inculcated into you as a young man. How do leaders in this day and age create a sense of duty with people when they look at work as a transaction?
I think we have to find meaning. Humans are, one of the things that we do at Rooftop, and I draw this from the Special Forces experience you and I had, is we put a lot of stock in human nature, in human dynamics, the human terrain. I think what sets Green Berets apart from other organizations and other outfits is we study human dynamics a lot. We look at human nature and how it shows up in terms of threats and opportunities at that primal level, right? And the reality is, and Ivan Tyrrell talks about this in his book, The Human Givens, humans are the most meaning-seeking creatures on the planet. We seek and assign meaning to every single thing that we do. That's why every mission statement in the U.S. military has task and purpose. Even if everything else is excluded, you always give that to the American fighting man and woman. Why? Because Simon Sinek was right. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The brain seeks meaning and then assigns meaning to everything it does. If there's an absence of meaning, then we are lost, we are rudderless, we are floating, we are adrift, and we start to go into a sympathetic state. Fear-based behavior starts to take over. We start to question that inner dialogue, the neural story map of pain from our past starts to infiltrate. Meaning gives us the anchor that we need to hang on and move through complexity, ambiguity, even chaos. And what I'm seeing today is leaders, one, they're not clear on their own purpose. They're not clear on their own why. And if you aren't, then if you're unclear, people smell it on you. Your people smell it on you. They know when you're not clear on your purpose. And also, I think leaders are not engaging their people on why they do what they do and helping them get a sense of their own purpose. I think that's why you see this great resignation having such an impact. People are looking for meaning. That's a leader problem. That's not an associate problem. And then finally, the organizational whys, the collective whys of our businesses have been affected by the pandemic and a range of other social issues, and leaders are not working with their teams to reframe what their collective why is. So you have this massive absence of meaning, and it's causing us to be rudderless and allow fear to drive our behavior, which is never a good thing, certainly in business.
Yeah. The clarity on purpose, as a coach, you probably, the work you do consulting, one of the foundational questions we ask people is, what do you want? And part of inherent in that is, what's your purpose? And really downstream of that is what is going to be your legacy? And you are right, Scott. There's a lot of people that are pretty senior leaders that don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, it's true, man. And like when I wrote the book, I sat down, Jan, it's such a complex topic, the collapse of Afghanistan. Does it become political? Does it become military? Thank you for that, man. But when I wrote that book, you know what? I got down to the why of it. I wanted to know, here's what I wanted to know. What does a promise mean to you, and how far would you go to honor it? Because I felt like that why, if I could address that why and tell the story, and I tell it in the third person, I don't even talk about, like, it's not a first person, this one time at band camp, here's what I did. Like, I put myself in the third person. And the reason is I wanted to explore what a promise means to people in this situation and how far would they go to honor it? Because in that, people can autobiographically locate themselves in that story and process, what does a promise mean to them?
Yep.
How far would they go to honor it? But it's just an example of how, if we, even in the most complex of topics, if we can just settle down and get clear on the why am I here? What do they need from me? Why am I doing this? Why are we, and reframe it and check in again and again. And I don't think you can over ask that question, man, because we are in such complex, low trust times right now that if we don't check in with the why of things on a regular basis, then people are going to create their own why out of fear. And that is not good.
I like the again, the premise of the book being, how far would I go to keep a promise? One of the things my podcast co-host is big on is, instead of referring to commitments that we make in meetings and at work, call them promises.
Absolutely.
So at the end of the meeting, Jim Vasilopoulos recommends, hey, have somebody tabulate, hey, what were all the promises that were made? Because it's easy to, miss a commitment. I mean, if you're a moral person, it's a very hard thing not, to not keep a promise.
That's right. Jim's a smart cookie.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. So, sort of a tactical question, going back to Pineapple Express, you got Nizam out.
Yeah.
And then, 500 other people. How did you go about vetting them? And I guess the weird part of my thinking is, I'm wondering, what were the demographics of those 500 people? Men, women, age, religion, service. I'm just wondering how you vetted them and what that pool ended up looking like.
So, to go back to some more, business speak, we got one of the things I insisted on as we scaled this thing up, because frankly, Jen, I didn't want to get involved in this again. I mean, I left the military for a reason. I was good with what I was doing with my life. I didn't need to get in the, and here's the thing too, man. Like, I'm a 53-year-old storyteller. I'm not exactly a number one draft pick for personnel extraction, and I thought, okay, if these people are going to trust us and we're going to advocate for them, we need to be real clear on what our value proposition is. And as I looked, I had some people come down from DC, from the War College, under, an anonymous cloak, to help us get clear on what we were doing in the midst of all this. And I'll talk about that in the book. And what they came away with the value prop was, we know who they are, we know where they are, and they trust us to move them responsibly and present them responsibly as highly vetted individuals to men and women pulling security on that gate who don't know. So that made total sense to me. I'm like, okay, I get that. I see what role we should play here. We served with them. We fought with them. We vetted them. We biometric them. We did polys on them. We know who they are. And our shepherds in this chat room, Jan, were iconic, Green Berets, SEALs who had worked for multiple tours. So I was very confident in the manifests that we had. In fact, I don't think there was probably a better level of vetting than these special ops veteran groups who were presenting these manifests. And so then the demographics. These were Afghan commandos, Afghan special forces. Some of them had gone to our Q course. These were Afghan special mission unit pilots. These were female judges. These were people that were extremely vetted and frankly, very at risk. Now with them were their families, their 78-year-old dads, their spouses, their 6-month-old babies that they were carrying in their arms. And what was astounding, you asked a tactical question, I'll give you a tactical answer. What was astounding is how quickly they trained their family to be special operators and move tactically from a loiter point to a link up point to get into a canal of feces, walk through that canal, look for a far recognition signal of a green chem light, show a pineapple on your phone, do a head count, get pulled through a 4-foot hole in a fence, and then processed onto a plane with discipline. And that was the demographics. And the final thing I'll say about these Afghan special operators is that they were amazing at repurposing. They reconned the airfield. They would go and help us connect with orphans, young girls who were in duress, families that were carrying children. They would run out and grab them. They were, as you might imagine, the special operations caliber individuals. Some of them died at Abbey Gate because they were looking for orphan girls that could not find the link up point. And these people were already safe. They could have stayed. That's why I wrote this book, because the stories of these Afghans, it's time for Afghan protagonists and heroes in this story. And that's who they are.
Let me ask you a controversial question, Scott. A Green Beret that just recently retired, I spoke to him about Pineapple Express probably 8 months ago, six or 8 months ago. And he basically said something to the effect, hey, we train these people to take care of Afghanistan. I'm not in favor of getting them out. I think they should have stayed and continued the work that we started. That's what we trained them for. What does that resonate at all, or does that go against every grain in your body? I mean, and have you heard that?
I have heard that. I've heard they didn't fight. And I think those are partial narratives. So I don't disagree with that statement, but let's add just a little bit of context here. First of all, we built these special operations units in our image, right? The commandos, look at the commandos, look at the KKA, look at the special forces. They were equipped just like us. They operated just like us. They did surgical strike just like us. They would ferry in on off targets using ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, that was US grade. They had special mission platforms that they went in on, weapons with all kinds of optics, and it worked because they were able to keep the Taliban off balance. And these special operators, maybe 20,000 of them out of the entire military, carried 98% of the load starting in 2014. And they lost tens of thousands of people, service wide. And so we built them in our own image, Jan. And then in June, we took away all of their contract support. So they had no platforms, no medevac, no ISR, no maintenance on their optics, no munitions for their fire support platforms, right? So everything that we had trained them and equipped them to do, the doctrine that we gave them, we pulled the plug with no explanation, no warning. That's number one. Number two, there was not a single Green Beret ODA on the ground months leading up to the withdrawal. Now, if we're going to make that argument that this Green Beret had, and I'm happy to have this conversation with him in the public space, be glad to do it. But if we're going to make that argument, then there should have been Green Beret teams on the ground developing low-level resistance and abilities and resilience to do the long fight. There was none of that. There were no special forces teams on the ground working with our NMRG, our commandos, or anything. It was wholesale abandonment, and the senior leaders in our regiment and the special operations community had the opportunity, I believe, to have rectified that, and they didn't. And so for us to make that argument, it's not a full argument, because we as advisors failed. And frankly, and I'll just say this, because I think when you have the bulk of our regiment right now feeling like we abandoned our partner and there's a moral injury where 73% of veterans feel betrayed, 67% feel humiliated, 81% spike in VA calls since August. Our leaders need to step forward on this and own this and put in place measures that will prevent systemic abandonment. Vietnam with the Montagnards, Syria with the Kurds, Iraqi police and military, and now the Afghans. Like, it is not good for the special forces community to have that kind of reputation, whether it was policy or not. We need to start looking at this and go, how is this impacting the next generation of Green Berets, the next generation of leaders? Like, we're getting a nasty habit of, I just sat in an auditorium listening to these former commandos. It's not good. And we're sticking our head in the sand like it didn't happen. So you can see I'm pretty adamant about this argument, and I don't think it's a fully coherent argument. Well,
and the fact that, and we're in a number of places around the world today with our brothers and sisters at risk in harm's way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
General Frank McKenzie, commander of U.S. Central Command at the time, said of the chaotic evacuation from Afghanistan, there's a lot of heartbreak associated with this departure. Without Scott Mann's special forces, there would have been a lot more. That must make you feel good to some degree.
It does. I am so proud of our regiment, Jan. I'm so proud of our Green Berets. I'm so proud of what they did behind the scenes. I think the only thing I would say is this. to our Gold Star families and to our veterans and to our special forces and our special operators who are wondering if it was worth it, if the 20 years were worth it. I've heard that a lot. I just sat in this room and I listened to this young woman who is she's a Kuchi, a nomadic tribeswoman, and she's an advocate. And she's one of the bravest women I've ever been in the presence of. But just before her was a Special Forces Gold Star son who had come up and talked about what it meant a year later, to him as a Gold Star son. But this woman said something, Jan, that I hope all of our veterans and Gold Stars will take to heart in our military families. She said, there are 8 million young men and women in Afghanistan who have not been heard from yet, who are not done yet. There are thousands of commandos and special forces and pilots who have not been heard from yet. And our time is coming. And we don't need U.S. boots on the ground. We're going to have our boots on the ground. The Taliban's days are numbered. And it's because we had the opportunity to taste freedom, to taste education, to taste empowerment while our U.S. veterans held that space for us. And man, it hit me. Like I just started weeping, because I believe that in my heart. I really do. I don't believe that we should count them out yet. I think look for the young Afghans to take the lead here. Look for women to lead us out of this. Look for our commando partners, and to our brothers and sisters in the military community. You did great things, and it just hasn't manifested yet. And I really believe that's true.
It makes me think of Sebastian Junger's most recent book called Freedom.
Yeah.
Where he talked about, what the cost was, and how complex that word really is.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a long battle, man. Democracies are incremental, just like great organizations. It's 3 steps forward, 4 steps back. And it's the long game, and it's the relationships and the social capital and going to the rooftop when nobody follows and knowing that one day they will. And that's all this is. One of the things that I say at the end of the book is, when we looked around and saw that nobody was coming, helping Afghanistan escape the Taliban and stand on its own, that was our Pineapple Express. What's yours? Because I really think that we need that in the world today. We need people who look around their own arena, and it doesn't have to be something strategic like a country's collapse, but just an area where you play a bigger game, a game bigger than yourself. And if you're waiting for somebody to come, nobody else is coming, man. Yeah. Like they're not. Your self-reliant leadership, in my assessment, is one of the greatest mantras in the business world today. Because when we look at the arena and we just realize nobody else is coming, there's a certain sense of peace that settles down over us, and we recognize, okay, it's just me, it's just us. I like those odds, and we can work with that.
Well, as we wrap up here. You said our entire function, our entire effort functioned off virtual networks, agile technology, and most of all, trust. So maybe as we wrap up, maybe you can just talk about trust a little bit and what that really meant.
Yeah, look, the more complex things get in life, the more chaotic things get in life. As humans, we don't have fur, fangs, or claws. Like the only thing that we have at an innate level is our ability to trust and connect with other humans. And it's with those social connections, those social bonds, those tangible and intangible linkages that we build when risk is low. That's what we leverage in the worst of times. And I implore anybody listening or watching this that tougher times are coming. Like we're going to hit more. That's just our new reality. Complexity and chaos, it's going to be our backyard swimming pool. And the people who thrive in that, the safe bet on that are the people who build trust and build relationships when risk is low, and then they leverage them when risk is high. And that is a skill. It's not just instinct, because the modern world is going to try to pull us away from that. It's going to tell us we don't have time for that. Just focus on the transaction. Just get the deal done. Just get to the agenda. Don't worry about the check-in on how people are doing right now. Don't walk the halls right now and check in on your people and see how they're doing with return to the office, because we're too busy. We got this next Zoom call. And that's the very stuff that builds social capital and is the antibody to chaos. So conditioning ourselves as leaders, not just with our businesses, but with our families, with our children, to continue to think of the relationship as the most precious asset on the planet, and to build that trust when risk is low so that it's there for you when risk is high.
Well said, my friend. Well said. Hey, just a reminder to everybody, this book is available out on Amazon. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is go out to Scott's website and learn about all the other work that he's doing. And Scott, anything, any updates on what's coming for you, play or anything like that you want to talk about?
Yeah, thanks. What we've done, we're really excited about, Jan, because when you read the stuff that I'm into there, it's a pretty big body of work, just like you. And so we created a scottmann.com website. All of my TED Talks are there. The nonprofit work that we're doing around veteran storytelling is there. Our play, Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret, which tells the story, actually, of the Afghan war through the lens of one Green Beret sergeant and his family. It just went to Amazon Prime. We turned it into a film when COVID shut us down. It's on Amazon Prime, Google TV, Apple TV, Vudu. There's info on the book there. There's info on how to help Afghans. I mean, it's a cool site. Our podcast is there. So scottmann.com. And then there's some big announcements coming up for the play for 2023 that maybe you and I and Jim can pull up separately. But just what I will tell you is this. If you liked the live version of the play before COVID shut it down, get ready, because there's something new coming, and it's going to be incredible.
Yep. That's great. And again, thanks for all that you do. The stuff we've talked about professionally, but there's a whole bunch of stuff you've done personally for me and my family, which I'm super grateful for. And what I'm talking about.
I do, brother. I do. It's my honor, and proud to call you a friend.
Yeah, likewise. Well, thanks for all you do, and I'll let you get back to your conference. And thanks for sharing some of that wisdom with us today.
All right. Thanks so much, Jan, and thanks everybody.